Welcome to the Anglotopia podcast, where we explore British history, travel, and culture. I'm your host, Jonathan Thomas, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by photographer and adventurer Quentin Lake, author of a stunning new book, The Perimeter, a photographic journey around the coast of Britain. Over the course of 5 extraordinary years, Quentin walked the entire 11,000 kilometers of the coast of mainland Britain, capturing the beauty, drama, and diversity of Britain's shores through his remarkable photography. From the White Cliffs of Dover to the rugged highlands of Scotland, from industrial ports to pristine beaches, his journey took him through every type of coastal landscape that Britain has to offer. And he took something like 200,000 pictures. So in his book, Quentin documents this epic adventure through over 1,300 carefully curated photographs and engaging personal stories that reveal both the challenges of his journey and the profound connection he developed with Britain's perimeter. Today, we're going to discuss what inspired him to walk the entire coastline of Britain and the physical and mental challenges he faced and the surprising discoveries he made along the way and how the journey changed his perspective on Britain's relationship with the sea. So welcome to the podcast, Quentin.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First, Quentin, what on earth gave you the idea to walk the entire coastline of Great Britain?
That's a very good question. Well, I'd been a travel photographer for about 25 years, and I'd always associated inspiration with the exotic. So I traveled to 70 countries. I've been to the Arctic 3 times and to deserts and sort of what I thought of as exotic adventure. And then about 12 years ago, I got meningitis and was physically very limited. So just walking a few hundred meters was challenging. And when my strength came back, I decided to do a kind of meditative slow walk down the River Thames, which is near where I live in Cheltenham in the Cotswolds, and the source. And I thought, well, if I get tired and feel ill, I could just kind of get a bus or a taxi home. So I did this very gentle, slow walk. And then I took abstract photographs of the river. And it was just for me, just as almost as recovery. And the pictures were some of the best I'd ever produced. And then when I got to the kind of coastal section at London at the end of the Thames, the stories and the inspiration just kind of seemed to get greater. And when I recovered fully, I then walked the River Severn, which is Britain's longest river. And then that coastal part, there's this crazy kind of 13-meter tide, which is second highest in the world. So when the tide goes down, it reveals this entire landscape of sand and mud, and super beautiful, super inspiring. And then it really hooked me. And it was only 2 weeks after I finished the Severn walk, I thought I want to dedicate the next few years of my life to this because, I'd found inspiration, and that's a difficult thing as a photographer. So I thought this is it for me for a while.
It sounds like it would have been a great adventure. And I think it's now, just to be clear to the listeners who aren't familiar with this project, he broke it up in stages over several years. He didn't do it all in one go. So he broke it up into different stages, and that's how the book is broken up. So now you have a wife and kids. So how did you convince your wife that this was a great idea? I need to be gone for weeks at a time, just so you know.
I think she's an artist. I think she understands that I find inspiration to make my work in the external world, and she finds it in the internal world. I can't say it was easy or without tension, but we want each other to be everything we can be, and that's how we express our love for each other.
Well, we the consumers of your book and your project thank your wife for being so cool with this project, because the photography is amazing, and we're gonna link to a gallery in the show notes of some of the highlights, and I can't wait to share them with you all because the pictures are beautiful. So setting off on this epic journey, how did you prepare physically and mentally to walk 11,000 kilometers? Because that sounds like a lot.
It is a lot, but the Norwegians have this great expression, the doorstep mile. The hardest part of any journey is taking the first step. And I'm a great believer. You just kind of go. So it actually, from having the idea, I registered a website. I decided I would do it. And a couple of weeks later, I started, and I kind of fixed the problems with the journey afterwards. So I didn't want to overcomplicate it. And it was, 10 times harder than I imagined it would be in the end. But at the beginning, I had the naivety of thinking, I just started from London, walking down the south coast, and it's kind of seemed quite low stakes. And I thought, well, if I have a trouble and I get injured, I could just go home and stop. And then I got fit and learnt better techniques and took lighter equipment, and it improved myself, if you like, as the journey progressed. And then in Scotland, where it would be just a few hours of daylight in the winter, almost constant storm, constant wind, carrying over 20 kilograms of equipment, not seeing anyone for 5 days at a time. I mean, it's just a whole different level of difficulty. But at that point, I'd already been traveling about 5,000 kilometers. So there was quite a lot of kind of momentum behind me. But if I was faced with the difficulty of the north of Scotland on day one, it would have knocked me out. But it sort of built me up gradually, if that makes sense.
That does make sense because, you know, I'm not saying it was a dawdle, but the south coast of England is very well developed. You're never more than a few miles from any village or town along the coast path, and the coast path is very well developed. But I imagine up in Scotland where, you know, the infrastructure is much different, and it's
very different. Yeah, and there's no network of footpaths either, so it can be hundreds of kilometers where it's kind of bushwhacking, and then sort of trying to figure out the way. And there's a clear for it's overgrown foliage, and you have to backtrack. So it's a whole level of complexity harder. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of visualizing the island of Great Britain in our heads. How did you break up the walk to make it more manageable?
Well, I used the historic counties. So I mean, the fact you've got England, Wales, Scotland, Britain, the island of Britain, United Kingdom, I mean, it's kind of complicated anyway, but it's even more complicated with the historic counties. So historically, the counties were geographically more similar sized areas that the country was divided in. And in modern times, for example, North Scotland is just called Highland, which is almost all of Scotland. whereas in the past, it was called things like Inverness-shire or Sutherland or Caithness. So I divided it up into these kind of relatively smaller chunks, although some still had a coastline of about 500 or 600 kilometres. So that's how I divided the project up. So I started in South London, then went to Kent and Sussex and so on. And I would walk for between 2 weeks and 2 months at a time, and always with a tent to kind of reduce cost.
So where were the shortest stretches and where were the longest stretches that you spent on the road?
It was all really practical travel stuff. So I always took a train to the trailhead and then a train back again. So I was looking at the map of Britain, which has got this wonderful train network, but it was always from a train stop. So when it was kind of near to me, which is near the border of Wales, sometimes I did just a few days. But when I went further north, it was maybe 2 days travel even to get to the northwest of Scotland. So then I would go for a couple of months at a time.
It'd be fun just to go on all those train rides.
Yeah, no, I know. It was by far the biggest expense of this journey. I've got this big box of train tickets, and that's that. Yeah.
So this kind of negates, we already answered this. So you were used to long distance walking before you did this journey, but was this on a total different scale than you expected?
Yeah, I mean, when I was 10, I walked from John O'Groats to Glasgow with my mum, which is about 400 kilometres. When I was 20, I walked from Lansdowne to John O'Groats, the two furthest points of Britain, which is 1,000 kilometres. And then most of my life, I've done different long treks in Britain. But weirdly, I'd never thought of combining them with photography, with work. Yeah. But I estimated the journey based on other writers' books and on using the Ordnance Survey maps. And I estimated the journey being about 10,000 kilometres. And in the actual fact, it was 11,000. So it was a lot further.
That brings up a good question. What books did you use for research, and what kind of inspired as you were planning this?
Well, I mean, John Merrill was the first man who wrote a book or recorded of walking the coast of Britain, and he wrote a book called The Sea on My Left when I was born, when I was in 1975, and that always was on my shelf as a beacon of, go on, you can do it as well. You can do it as well. And then sort of 30 years ago, I answered the call. I mean, other books that inspired me would be, I don't know, Bill Bryson's Notes from a Small Island. I always loved that book, and Little Dribbling. And then maybe Kingdom by the Sea by Thoreau. It is these kind of great kind of coastal journey or journeys around Britain. I've always enjoyed that as a travel genre.
Can't imagine walking Lansdowne to John O'Groats. We drove it in 2018 and took like 2 weeks to kind of take our time along the route. And I'm like, that would be a really, really long walk.
I mean, that was a truly life-changing experience for me, because I was training to be an architect. I did the full 7 years, but I think if I hadn't done that journey, my life would have taken a very different path, because I did that when I was about 21, and the memories of that journey were so real to me every day that nothing compared to it in the rest of my life. So I wanted to kind of capture that again, and in a way, my whole life has been trying to capture that, how alive I feel when I've got my home on my back and I'm traveling through the landscape and meeting people and seeing new things. And I'm an addict now. I can't, I've got my bag is packed in the side of my room here. I'm away every few weeks. I need to know that in my diary, I've got another journey planned.
I'm the same way about my trips to Britain. They always provide a kind of clarity that you're like, this is it. This is why I'm alive, to experience these places.
I'm delighted you feel that way. Yeah, I think it's travel generally, isn't it? Because and also when you have something in your diary, even if it's a very modest journey, and you've got, if whatever's happening in your life, in the next 7 days, I'm going to be here or going there, it just keeps you going.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So of all these walks, including your coastal walk, what has been your favorite long distance walk in Britain? Like, what would you recommend people do? Like,
what would I recommend people do? Okay, so for the hardcore, for your kind of Pacific Coast Trail hikers, and because I get most of my sort of technical inspiration from US hikers, because there's a whole different through hiking culture in the States, whereas here it's so wet, but people do tend to go a bit heavy in Britain with gear. I'd say the Cambrian Way, which is it's a trans Wales footpath that goes from Cardiff to Conwy, and it goes over 47 mountains, like a zigzag route through Wales, and that's extremely adventurous and challenging for maybe someone going on holiday for a week who wants a taste of England and Britain. I think maybe the North Downs Way, which is like the old Pilgrim's Way. You end up in Winchester, you get the coast, you get to see all these beautiful, the downs, the pubs, or maybe even the Cotswold Way, which goes across the escarpment in the Cotswolds.
Well, I've always wanted to do Hadrian's Wall. Have you done Hadrian's Wall?
I have done Hadrian's Wall. In fact, I've done all the long distance footpaths in Britain. That was my kind of follow-on project from the perimeter. In terms of, because that's like walking. It's a concept really. You're really walking with history. You really feel the sense of the Romans being there as an experience. It's probably the most intense one, Hadrian's Wall. Yeah. I've
been wanting to do it for many, many years. I need to just do it.
I'd really recommend it. I mean, there's no duds. The national trails, there's about 17. They're all incredible.
So this question is a bit nerdy, but what equipment do you use in your photography?
It's not nerdy at all. I mean, it's vital. I use this. I'm just holding it up. It's a very large camera. A 5 DSR, which is a 52 megapixel camera, and I use a very long lens here, which is a 70 to 300, because I like to pull out the details from the subject, and then I use a wide lens to complement that, which is 16 to 35.
Now I have lens envy.
What do you use yourself?
I use a Sony A7 II. I've got a wide angle lens and just the kit lens that it came with.
Yeah.
And then for video, it's not glamorous at all. It's a DJI Osmo, but it's on a gimbal, so it does
the job, doesn't it?
It does the job, yeah. So and then I have an old Sony Nex 7 that I use because what I'll do is because I like to visit a lot of stately homes and castles. I'll put the wide angle lens on one camera, put the nice kit lens on the other camera. That way I can get both perspectives of the houses, because the rooms usually appreciate the wide angle lenses better. You mentioned in your book that walking opens your heart and your mind. Can you elaborate on how this journey changed you personally as you pursued it?
There's some kind of magic. I think it's the kind of contemplative rhythm of just walking slowly for days at a time that I become much more attuned to what I'm looking at and who I'm meeting, and I feel I can see things with a clearer eye as a photographer. I mean, if you suddenly drop me now at Edinburgh and asked me to take some pictures, I kind of wouldn't be able to do it. I'd feel every picture I took like a postcard, or I was bringing too much baggage with me. But if I've walked there for 3 days, I see how the landscape changes. I see the city opening up in front of me, how the accent changes. I'm just much more kind of dialed in to noticing what's different. And I think as a photographer, it's noticing what's different is what you need to be able to do. But in answer to your question about how it changed me, I mean, it's these thousands of kilometers of calm, of being on the trail is kind of in me now. It's in my soul, which I can draw on.
That sounds really nice. Yeah, and
it is nice. It is nice.
I envy your process, because when as Americans we get very little time off, and so when are able to travel, like it's go 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 go. So there's not much time to really sit and contemplate and get the right pictures, just to capture as many as you can. And I'm gonna have to be a little more contemplative on our future trips, because maybe I'll get some better pictures. So were there moments when you considered abandoning the project? What kept you going all those years?
Well, a long journey like this, I mean, there's this kind of weight of pressure the more you've done it. And I was engaged in social media and had some media interest from quite early on. So I actually felt quite a big responsibility to continue. And I also felt a responsibility for every little part of Britain's coast as someone's special patch. And I wanted to give it equal kind of love and attention as the last one. So the idea that I'd sort of switch off a bit, or I sort of wouldn't give it as much energy, that felt almost a sort of moral failing. And the kind of, when you've overcome a few problems, it makes overcoming the next problem easier.
Puts things in perspective, right? That
it does, yeah.
Yeah, I know. One of my favorite genres of social media is British person who does an incredible thing, like
bonkers
walking
thing,
the entire coastline of Britain, or visits every train station, or visits every bus station. And those are my favorites. I love those.
It's very obsessive.
Yeah, I love it. It's a very British phenomenon, because we don't really do that here.
But also, in answer to your question, I mean, that there was moments in Scotland, in Knoydart, where it was the winter. I was completely soaked through. I was lacking in energy. I'd sort of fallen over for the countless time that day, and I kind of collapsed onto the heather and kind of weeping, going, I can't take another step. But then, what am I supposed to do? It's, if I don't move, I'm going to get too cold, and you kind of pull yourself together and keep going.
Yeah, I found on long walks that the worst thing you can do is stop. If you stop, then
absolutely
it makes it even harder to get going again.
Yeah.
So did you have any casualties along the way with equipment and cameras and anything? Because once it got really nasty.
An awful lot. I mean, I wore out 7 pairs of shoes, two pairs of backpacks. The shoulder straps just wore out completely. I had 2 lenses that were damaged. I had to have. I mean, my camera is like a Frankenstein. All the different bits are broken and been repaired multiple times. It's really tough on gear. Remarkably, my beloved tent is still going. I've probably slept about 1,000 kilometers, 1,000 nights in it.
So damaged equipment. Now, was there damage to yourself? Like you experienced several injuries during the walk, and how did you manage that? Like, did you ever get stuck where you had to be rescued?
Nearly. I managed to self-rescue each time, but I had a torn tendon near Liverpool, so I had to sort of wear a sort of incapacitating boot and have physio for 2 months, and then I had a shin splints up in Scotland. So it was very painful, but I could sort of self-rescue and get to a hospital. And it changed my whole mindset, really, because I think for a journey like this, you need to do some training and eat well to be able to keep going. And it was a bit of self-knowledge there, because I wasn't doing either of those things and still pounding myself, and then your body just kind of gives up. So each one has been a kind of a lesson. I'll be more physically able to do the journey now, 10 years later, than when I started, for sure.
Interesting. Can you share some stories of memorable encounters with strangers that particularly affected you along the way? Because I'm sure you encountered lots of people.
Many people, and I think the most incredible for me would be a farmer called Farmer Hughes, who I met in the Rins in Dumfries and Galloway. And I'd come off the mountains behind his field, and there's a photograph of him in the book, and he's over 80. He's just been mucking out his cows, and in the farm around him there are all these crofts, these small cottages, and they're all derelict. And he told me about when he was younger, how all those 5 families, they all worked for him. One by one they'd kind of left, and it was a bit too far away for tourists to want to live in these cottages. So he was just like the last of the Mohicans, and it's really sort of energetic sort of specimen. But yeah, it felt like I was witnessing the kind of end of an era.
How did your perception of Britain change after seeing so much of its coastline and encountering so many people along the way?
Well, it is very wild, as you alluded to at the beginning. The South Coast, you're never very far from an ice cream and a fish and chip shop. But Scotland, it's like 5 days for seeing anyone. It's also half of the journey. Half of my book is about Scotland. So the scale of it is kind of it's kind of epic. It's kind of wild, and it's kind of connections to, you know, the Norse culture, to Vikings, to kind of Christianity from Ireland. So there's just so many fascinating different influences that wasn't aware of at the beginning, and each zone is so distinctive. Whether it's the phrasing, whether it's the accent, whether it's what people are interested in, and everyone seems to kind of love their own patch. So that patchwork nature of the island, I've got a real new respect for it. You know, I can't believe if I'm in London traveling on the tube that I'm actually on the same piece of rock where the kind of Great Cliffs of Scotland are, which is it's kind of, it really does change my perception of what it is to be British. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love most about Britain is that it's a small island. I don't mean that in an insulting way.
No, it is a small island. Yeah.
It's a small island, but
yeah,
it is so incredibly geographically diverse. And
absolutely, yeah.
You know, I where I live in Indiana in the U.S. Midwest, it's pretty much the same landscape for hundreds of miles in every direction.
Yeah.
And there's no variety other than, oh, there's a big lake, you know.
Yeah.
But in Britain, you know, you go to, you know, you've got you've got the Cumbrian Lake District where there's tons of lakes. You've got the mountains of Scotland. You've got, you know, river valleys and coastlines, and there's even deserts on the coastline. So it's crazy. You can find pretty much every little micro geography that the Earth can manage in one little compact package.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why so many geological discoveries were here, and you know, all these terms like Cambrian and come from different parts of the British coast. When you look at the geological map, it's just this crazy. It's everything. It's everything. I mean, there's a part of the South Coast, which is I travelled in Namibia a few years ago, and I kind of recognised that kind of red rock, because that used to be from that part of the world.
Yeah, they say that the Scottish Highlands are actually the same mountain range as the Appalachians.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
So, well, I think I know the answer to this question, but what was the most challenging terrain?
Oh, well, it's the rough bounds, which is the area around Knoydart, which is kind of sort of adjacent to the Isle of Skye in Northwest Highlands. There's no roads. There's very few paths. It's huge cliffs, but also there's like kind of micro cliffs of kind of 5-10 meters. It's an extremely challenging terrain to move through on foot. It's also my favorite part. It's the most inspiring photographically. I met extraordinary people. It felt like, it's not often that a journey, it sort of is quite symbolic, you know, it's hardest, but it's also the most profound or the most beautiful. So my favorite images of the book, which is of a cottage called Skeary next to Loch Horn, this tiny cottage with this huge snowy mountain behind it rising up. That was taken after 5 days walking around Knoydart.
Well, and the hardest terrain has the prettiest pictures. I mean,
it's a cliche, but I mean,
when listeners look at the book, like, he worked for these pictures, they're great. I've looked through the whole book, and I would say the Scotland bits are just, they're epic, and
they are epic. Yes.
Yeah. And I have lots of photographic books in the library about Britain and Scotland, and your pictures are just world class. So
thank you so much. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, it kind of is a love letter. I just love Scotland. I think it's the most beautiful place in the world, and I hope that comes across in the images. Yeah,
it definitely does, and you've really kind of given a new perspective on Scotland that, you know, that hasn't been done before, because you're so remote. You've really worked for those pictures.
Thank you. Yeah, because I think it's also. Yeah, I agree. I don't like it when a picture looks like the photographers come out of their air-conditioned camper van and just, you know, it's just, I think it's sort of, there is something about it. And also you kind of make your own luck, I think, walking as a photographer, because you're there often in Scotland, as you well know, you only get maybe 5-10 minutes of beautiful light in a day, but every day that moment happens, and if you're ready to capture it, then something special happens.
Yeah, and that's something on photographic expeditions I've been on. Many years ago, I connected with a local photographer in Dorset. We took the most beautiful landscape pictures of Dorset, and I was like, I'm coming to Dorset for Christmas. Can you just take me out for the day and just and take me around and show me how you captured this landscape. And he
Yeah.
did it, and he was perfectly happy to. And we spent all day chasing the perfect light. And
Yeah.
I had never thought to like do that. And he knew exactly, because he knew the landscape so well, he knew exactly which part of the day to go to which place, because when the
Yes.
sun
Yeah.
and the low winter sun would be perfect. And it's,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, so conversely, what was the most enjoyable section of the walk where you're like, this is great. This is everything's going perfect.
I think it would be, I mean, Northumberland, because that's the county adjacent to Scotland. And actually, my first impression, I was pretty sad to leave Scotland, and I'd never travelled to Northumberland. And that's where you've got Holy Island, which is this tidal island, which is a big part of British history, where the Vikings first came and raided. And then you've got Bamburgh Castle. That's another amazing epic bit of British history. And when it was a separate kingdom before the kingdoms were merged to become England. I loved it. And it was one thing after the other. Holy Island was incredible. Bamburgh was incredible. And the huge, expansive beaches with seagrass and this sense of freedom. And it was pretty easy walking. And people were great. Food was great. You get these nice kind of traditional pies up in Northumberland. It was the whole thing. I was going, this is fine. I like this. This is good. Yeah. Yeah.
I can confirm Northumberland is beautiful. Yeah, the rich history up there is so deep, and
It is so deep.
Yeah. Did you walk to Holy Island and brave the tides and all that?
I really had a truly cosmic experience, because as you well know, the tides have to be right, or you get stranded. And it was a full moon, so the tide was very strong, and it was dark, and it kind of, when you describe it in words, it sounds a really dangerous, crazy thing to do, but I could see perfectly by moonlight. So I walked to Holy Island, those 6 kilometers, and moonlight. In the chapter on the book, I've got these moonlit pictures of those escape. If you get stuck by the tide, you can huddle up on these kind of weird platforms, and I've got these strange pictures of these things in moonlight. And then I camped on the bay there where the Vikings landed on the north of the island in the seagrass.
So speaking of camping, did you ever run into any issues wild camping like that? Because I know you can't actually camp just anywhere. You have to be very careful about it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm a big believer in the right to roam that exists in Scotland. So in Scotland, for your listeners that aren't familiar, you have the right to walk wherever you want, as long as you don't disturb a farmer or a landowner, and you have the right to camp wherever you want in the same reason. Whereas in England, you can't. It's kind of tolerated, maybe above 300 meters in certain national parks. There's a sort of unwritten acceptance, but essentially, to do it, you need to stealth camp, and there's a community of thousands of us that do that. So, but that means you're pitching late at night, you're not making any noise, you're not leaving any trace, and that's how I did it for the hundreds of days in England. So it's not that sort of difficult if you're careful, especially as a solo traveler, but it does make you feel like a kind of a vagrant. And it's weird for me as someone born English to actually feel more that it's more my country in Scotland. So I didn't run into any problems like that. Sometimes I got lost, but my approach is non-confrontational. So if an angry landowner comes towards me, I just apologize. I say I'm lost. And 9 times out of 10, they just point me in the right direction.
Good strategy. I'm lost.
Yeah,
I can get away.
Yeah.
I can get away with it as an American easily.
But just a little anecdote. I mean, my first day at Gretna Green into Scotland, I was pulling this "I'm lost" line when the farmer beckoned me over. But all he wanted to know is if he could advise me the best way across his field, if I needed any food, and if I wanted any water. So it's just unbelievable. It's wonderful. It's totally
I love
different.
that. Yeah, that's a wonderful story, because it really shows that, if you give people enough time to talk to them, that you find they'll be very interested in what you're actually doing. And I'm sure you saw that on social media, because you had a huge following on social media as you did this journey. Did you find that social media kind of changed your journey as you took it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, in the acknowledgements in the book, and it's truly heartfelt. I really thanked the kind of Twitter, as it was then, back in the good old days, community, but because I would talk about an area I was traveling to, and people would share the stories of their grandparents that got married here, or some interesting story, and people's comments guided me. So probably maybe even a quarter of the things I found in this book, which aren't in your kind of TripAdvisor Lonely Planet guides, as it were, I was guided to them by kind of the generosity of people on social media. So it kind of had a kind of travel enabling aspect to it, but also it was kind of practical. Sometimes people would put me up, or if people saw me having a really hard time, people would offer me their kind of caravan or a meal. So I made some kind of friends, and it did help. And obviously doing a journey when you know you have an audience, it does make it different. But for me, it was positive because it made me kind of try harder to make sure I was sharing content of value. And it also helps edit it, because if I kind of got facts or observations wrong, people were quite quick to tell me that. So it's quite good to learn that as I was traveling rather than later. Yeah.
Believe me, I know. I've been writing and editing on the internet since 2007, and
oh wow, okay, a veteran. Yeah,
I've been told I've been wrong more times than I can count.
Yeah.
It's helpful because it just makes you better in the end.
It does.
And then really mad when you make a dumb mistake too, because you're like, I knew better.
Yeah.
You photographed everything from sublime natural landscapes to industrial infrastructure. What drew you to these contrasting subjects? Because a lot of photographers kind of focus on one thing or the other. And in your book, there's a lot of interesting infrastructure. And I'm an infrastructure nerd, so I'm like,
good. And I mean, I hope that's almost the take home of this whole project. I mean, I've never understood why people don't visit kind of nuclear power stations with the same reverence as cathedrals. I don't see a difference there. Like they are the kind of modern wonders, and they're kind of extraordinary, and they're visually extraordinary, and without them we couldn't live our lives. And to me, they have the same value as Stonehenge, or something equally interesting and valid. And I strongly resist the idea of Britain being entirely a sort of historical palimpsest. I mean, the fascinating thing is that you have these layers of history of Norman, Tudor, the whole thing, it's all there wherever you look. But then you also have these modernist things. I love landscapes but I'm fascinated by landscapes with pylons in, the steel industry, the plumes of smoke from the smoke factories. And to me, that's as British and as honest an observation of the landscape as looking at the White Cliffs of Dover. And so I think visually, I really did not want this book to look like, a cliched image of the British landscape like you'd get on a butter packet, rolling fields. And I mean, that is a part of it where I live. Sometimes it can look like that, but I like the honesty that work is being made here now. And also you have the remnants of the colonial era of all the work and industry in the past, and it's a huge part of it. It's kind of quite a melancholy part of it, especially on the coast, because there's these huge bits of industry which are now no longer relevant. Say down the Clyde in Glasgow, which used to be one of the greatest shipbuilding places in the world, and now there's just a handful of ships. So that's a big part of our British identity, I think, which I didn't want to ignore. And when you had something modern, fascinating, like say the offshore industry where wind turbines are being built. So now the shipyards are often used to build the wind turbines, the jackets, which are the steel structures that hold up the turbines, which are massive, the size of oil rigs. And then those are being built now. So I found all that really very interesting.
Yeah, it is super interesting. And that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that Britain's landscape and everybody's landscape is a living landscape, and it changes with every generation. And we get a lot of stick when we feature modern architecture in articles about Great British buildings and stuff.
Really do? Yeah.
People are like, well, I don't like the modern stuff. I like the Victorian stuff. And I'm like, well, you know what? The Edwardians said the same thing. They didn't like the Edwardian stuff. They liked the Victorian stuff.
Exactly.
There was a whole wave of people who wanted to knock down all the Victorian buildings, and so this appreciation for architecture, like, it's not static. It's a constantly evolving thing. And
exactly. Yeah. I mean, St. Paul's Cathedral, where I started the journey, it has a dome like St. Peter's in Rome, and at the time people thought that was outrageous, that's scandalous. British church had to have a spire on it, and then a few hundred years later, and it survived the Blitz. Everyone loves it, but at the time it was scandalous, as you say.
Yeah. It makes me think of in my own area. I live just a few miles from the Lake Michigan coast,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a huge power plant right on the middle of the coast, and it's the power plant part is kind of an eyesore, but it has a
Mm.
cooling tower that everyone thinks it's a nuclear power plant, but it's not. It's just a big cooling tower for
Yeah.
cooling water. And it's become though a landmark in the area. People know, everybody knows where it is because you can see it for miles around. And well, the power plant's going to be decommissioned in a few
Mm.
years,
Mm.
and now the conversation is, well, should we knock the tower down? It's a symbol of the community now, and I'm in the camp that no, we shouldn't knock it down.
Yeah.
Keep it
Yeah.
as an ornament, even if it's useless,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's part of our built landscape now. You can't
Yeah.
just knock it down. It's
Yeah.
we need to
No,
keep
no.
that heritage.
No, I agree. I agree. Yeah, it actually touches on a point that's kind of fascinated me since I finished the walk. That I think there's 3 power stations I photographed which have now been decommissioned and have been knocked down, and then the Britain's biggest steelworks in Teesside. I did the whole double spread in the book, and that's been completely flattened. So it's all gone. So the things you think are permanent are kind of quite transient. I mean, that's one of the weird magical things about photography. You never quite know if you're photographing the end of something.
Yeah, impermanence, and that's
exactly
that's something we've run into even in our own travels over 25 years. Is you think a place is always going to be there for you to enjoy, and well, actually no, it's not. And ownership of buildings changes, local priorities change, and all of a sudden a favorite thing is gone. So that's why it's all the more reason to enjoy things in the moment, because it might not be there in the future. And I think that you mentioned the steel works. I think it's interesting because I think Britain now only has one steelworks left, and the government just did an emergency legislation this past weekend to basically nationalize it so that you maintain that steelmaking capacity, because once you lose it, it's gone forever.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have Lake Michigan is where a lot of steel plants are, so it's like once you turn a blast furnace off, you can't turn it back on. So don't want to.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like in the States, but here, whether it's Teesside or Port Talbot, I mean, the people in those communities, it'll be fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers all working in the same place. And it's not just the fact that it's an industry, it's just you're eviscerating the whole culture of the area. Yeah.
Well, and not to get into the weeds, but it's that stuff that leads to economic and political crises, and because people are unhappy, and you want those people to be happy. So anyway, more positive things. 1,000 pictures in this project.
Yeah.
How on earth did you whittle it down to the 1,300 that are in the book, which is already a lot?
Yeah. Okay, so there are. I'm very good at taking bad pictures, but my technique as a photographer will be I'll sketch the subject. So if I was say photographing you, I'd move around you, I'd try different angles, different lighting, different focal lengths. So maybe if I was doing a portrait of you, pretty quickly I'd generate 30, 40 images, and by doing that, I'd have an idea of what focal length and light I liked with you as a subject, and then I'd sort of dig harder into that to make a better image. So when I'm editing them in Lightroom, say if there's a subject matter, let's say a lighthouse for sake of argument, I can I've got 80 shots, I can pretty immediately take out 50 because they were just kind of sketches to get there, and then I'll probably whittle it down to 4 or 5, which I think is kind of strong, and then I'll do some kind of post processing on them. I'll adjust the tone and the color and do gradient fills, things like that. And hopefully the best one will rise to the surface, but sometimes I might need to sleep on it or think of it. So that's the kind of micro process. But as I went, I blogged all this on a website. So I produce about 20 to 30 images per day on my blog that I thought was sort of okay as images. And then when it came to producing a book, it was just really taking the very, very best images, but with the graphic designer, a woman called Claire Skeets, that was kind of really brilliant to work with. It's not just about having the best images. It had to be some images that gave people a hook that was visually accessible, that people could know, okay, we're in Scotland here, we're in Wales there. And then others where some of the spreads might look like it's purely aesthetic, and others where we wanted to get some history or geology or some factual element in it. And then there's hopefully a element of humor as well. We want the sort of the British passive aggressive sign features quite close in this book. So there were kind of different, each chapter we assessed it. So is it beautiful? Is it interesting? Is there an element of humor? Is there something which is unexpected? And then sometimes we went through a few iterations to get to that point. So as you say, that there's 1,300 images in the book, but with the graphic designer, we worked on about 3,000 shortlist in order to make each page work, because she needed different options to make each page look good together.
Well, I applaud you guys because you succeeded, and because it's very easy with big landscape books to just like, oh, another landscape, like the way you have selected and laid out the pictures, it stays very engaging throughout, so that there's always
thank you so much for that.
New.
That's Claire Skeets' amazing work. I agree. I really, but I think it's sort of achieved something impossible, because when I was talking to the editor at the beginning of the project, I couldn't actually believe they wanted to do 1,300 images. It seemed kind of bonkers, but in a way that's a unique selling point. But yeah, as you say, it only works because the images work together on the page as a piece of poetry.
Yeah, they tell a visual story and a visual journey that isn't just, oh, here's a famous thing that I saw. Well, no, here's this famous thing in a new light that you may not even ever seen, because there's intent here. The photographer has spent quality amount of time to get the light right, get the shot right. Like it's not just, you didn't just snap a bunch of pictures as you went for a walk.
So what I hope it achieves is the kind of lived experience of what it's like to do a walk like that you can walk through a firing range and see sort of blowing up tanks. Then you can walk onto a beach and see kind of a bunch of kids windsurfing. Then you can see some piece of classic picturesque England with thatched cottages and pubs and people with dogs, and then you can walk to your nuclear power station, and then you can be and that is what it's like to walk the coast. You get that maybe half an hour, 1 hour, half an hour, and that's it's very disorientating really and inspiring, but that's what I tried to convey with the pictures.
So in the book you mentioned an incident with cows. What other of charging at you, what other wildlife encounters did you have?
I don't know if the listeners will find that funny, but there are like a quite disturbing number of casualties from cows charging people in British fields, and often farmers. The biggest problem is probably, into beasties is kind of midges in Scotland, because they're very irritating, and then Lyme disease is a big problem in Scotland. I didn't meet a single outdoor worker that hadn't had someone who had suffered badly from Lyme disease, which can be fatal, and I had antibiotics a few times myself from it. It's very hard to not get bitten. But in terms of inspiring encounters, it would be probably near Ben Nevis, two sea eagles flew over the top of me with a fish in their talons, close enough, and I photographed it as like close enough to see their fish supper. I saw a lot of otters. So in Neudaert, often I'd walk until the evening, and then I'd make a meal with my stove to get a bit of warmth and energy to do some more walking, and that's often quite a quiet time. I'd sort of become invisible in landscape, and I'd see lots of wildlife then. And one night, a family of otters just walked past me. There was sort of 5 just right past my feet, and I sort of had my hand on the jet boil stove, and I just gently turned the sand down and just kept completely silent, and they walked past me. So
that's sublime moments like that you just you can't even replicate.
You can't. No.
Yeah. So your journey concluded right as the pandemic happened, and that actually affected how you ended it. That's actually when I discovered you. I heard about you from somewhere and started following. So like, how did that experience change your perspective, or even how did it change your project?
I cannot tell you how frustrating this is, because I've been traveling for 4.5 years, and as well as the shin splints and the torn tendon, I'd been embayed under the cliffs in Holderness, which is the fastest eroding cliffs in Europe. They're 5-7 meters a year, and I'm stuck below these kind of clay cliffs. And so all these different things that I'd overcome, and then it was like a man-made problem. And the first feeling was that I was sort of socially distancing with fine style, because I could sleep in my little tent in the dunes. And I was in Norfolk when the lockdown came, and Norfolk is, lots of people from London have holiday homes there. So there began to be a sort of bit of a tension at that beginning when people didn't really understand what was going on with COVID. So like locals might resent the fact that there were incomers coming in. And I could feel that sort of tide turning of people changing from being very friendly and welcoming to being a little bit wary. And I had this sort of strange thing of a couple of days eating in pubs entirely by myself. And then the day before Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, announced the lockdown, I thought that this is, I need to go home. This is the wrong thing to be doing on a public journey like this, to be essentially endorsing breaking the social distancing. So I had this sort of strange journey. I was the only one on the train. When I walked home from the train station, it was no one but foxes. And then, like everyone else, I just took all the months of lockdown being trapped inside, which was, it made it even more acute to suddenly go from...
Right. Yeah. After all that walking and all that being outside, just to be cooped up inside, I imagine that one's much harder than a lot of us dealt with.
It felt it, yeah.
So then you were able to finish the walk. Once the lockdown.
So then it was the gap between the first lockdown and the second lockdown. So there was an immense sense of time pressure.
Like, oh, get done. Yeah,
because I actually only finished 2 days before the second lockdown, so I could have been stuck again. Yeah.
So this is also kind of into the weeds, but what was your typical daily routine on the trail? Like, how many hours did you typically walk versus working to photograph?
Okay, so it averaged out at 25 kilometers a day walking. The longest day was about 45 kilometers. The shortest day in the hardest terrain like Noida would be about 8 kilometers. And I would tend to walk from dawn to dusk, which in the summer would be hugely long time, and in the winter would be less time. And then I would sort of allow for about 3 to 4 hours of photography a day. But it did vary in that some days were super inspiring visually, and I wouldn't cover so much distance. And I did a lot of walking at night. I quite enjoy that because I'd put my head torch on. I wouldn't have to worry about taking photos. I could just walk. It felt like a kind of break. Obviously, I was missing things, but that happens on a journey like this. And then days where it was stormy or very bad weather, I was struggling to get 2 minutes of photography. So it kind of balanced out. And then I take a rest day every 5 days, and then that gave me a bit of leeway, so I could like eat into that sometimes or push that rest day. But but every day I planned to walk. I had to walk because of booking train tickets.
Was there any point where you had a day where you photographed something, you're like, the photograph just isn't right, I'm going to stay and get it right the next day, or did you just keep plowing?
I just kept plowing on. I mean, at the beginning, I thought I sometimes considered that kind of thing, but I mean, it is frustrating if there's something which is spectacular. Say Durdle Door in the south coast, there's this beautiful rock arch. I was there and the light was not good at all. And I was tired. I just wasn't in the zone. I didn't take it. The pictures were not a success. And I did consider, should I camp? Should I wait? But I mean, I think a journey like this, some days everything aligns. You're inspired. The light is right. Everything's perfect. Sometimes you can't capture everything. So I soon learned to just kind of go with the flow, with the weather more. But that said, I made my own luck. If I'd often camp near, so there's a photograph of the Minack Theatre, which is an open air theatre in Cornwall. Yeah. That's kind of really incredible. And I camped near there for the night before, so I could photograph it in the evening light, in dusk, at night, and then the next morning. So I had kind of like 5 different light conditions. The dusk one was really successful. So that's something you could do as a photographer walking like this to kind of make it more likely you're going to get something good.
And that one's in the book.
That one's in the book.
Yeah. It's very good. So well done.
Thanks. But that's sort of where I go, this is amazing. I really want to capture this. So I would adjust the day to try and camp near there.
So are there any places you discovered along the way that you have since returned to or planned or really want to return to?
I have returned to Noidart. I led a photo course out there as an instructor. I mean, I just really love that. I've been back to the Yorkshire coast, Cleveland. I walked the Cleveland Way. I go on holiday to Cornwall with my family every year. I still love Cornwall. So, yeah, I mean, I think Northumberland would be somewhere that that triggered something in me I want to explore more of, which as a next reunion. But it's whenever I travel by train in Britain, you nearly always end up by a coast, and it's always not. I mean, everywhere is nostalgic because I've sort of been to all of it. So whenever I always like, whenever I'm on the train, I look on the map, on the Ordnance Survey map, and all the memories of when I was there last kind of flow over me.
Oh, and you could do a whole book on Northumberland alone.
You could. Yeah.
You're like, don't tempt me.
Yeah.
So, after completing this epic journey, what's next for you? Do you have another ambitious big project, or are you done with 11,000-mile walks?
No. So after I finished, because it took 5 years to walk it and 5 years to edit it, so it's been a 10-year journey, but only 5 years was physical. So the last 3 years, I've completed all the national trails, the 16 national trails of Britain, and currently I'm about halfway through climbing and camping on the top of all the mountains of England and Wales. There's 442 mountains, and I'm doing it in the same way as the perimeter train station, beginning and end, 4 or 5 days with tent and food, camping up really kind of somewhere high, taking some pictures and getting to understand. And this one's really fascinating because there's no like official way to do this. So I'm just kind of figuring out, joining mountains together on the map and then figuring out where it leads me. I mean, this is just a map of the mountain region. So most of the mountains are in Wales, and then North England, and then they're grouped. So it's just. I mean, all these journeys are just an excuse to discover interesting things, and often the most interesting things aren't the top of the mountain. It's the pub or the person you meet on the way there. That's why I like these kind of list things. It's not like a kind of list ticking thing. It's just a means to explore something new and give it some structure.
Well, if your publisher is watching, they better make books about the national trails and the mountain thing too, because I'm sure they're going to be great. So
thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our conversation with Quentin Lake and his extraordinary 11,000-kilometer journey around the coast of Britain. I want to thank Quentin for sharing his insights, challenges, and discoveries from his remarkable adventure. Your photographs truly capture the soul of Britain's diverse coastline, from its wild, untamed spaces to its industrial heritage. The Perimeter, a photographic journey around Britain. Hold it up, Quentin, is available.
Yeah, sure.
Is available now from Hutchinson and Heinemann. It's not just a beautiful coffee table book, but a testament to human endurance, artistic vision, and a deep love for the landscape that define Britain. So we will put links in the show notes to Quentin's social media and for the book and everything. And thank you so much for joining us on the Anglotopia podcast, Quentin.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.